Hi, everyone. Today we're talking about how storytelling can help you accelerate your actuarial career. I know it sounds a bit like an unexpected tip because, as actuaries, we're not trained in storytelling, nor do we have a reputation for being engaging storytellers. But storytelling is a powerful skill that can really help you in your career. And joining us for that discussion is experienced actuary and storyteller John Harney. John's currently working in the pension space in the UK. He's a fellow of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, and he's a chartered enterprise risk actuary. Originally hailing from Ireland, John is an accomplished speaker and he is passionate about the power of social media, particularly LinkedIn, in giving pensions and wider actuarial issues a bigger public voice. John, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Julia. I'm really excited to have this conversation from across the world. It's all very international and exciting. So delighted to be here.
And I'm delighted to have you. And it's interesting your passion about speaking and storytelling and social media, because John, you and I met over LinkedIn. We've never met in person, and we're on opposite sides of the world.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because I suppose as we get into our conversation, it's all going to become a little bit meta, I suppose, because I'm
Mm.
really passionate about LinkedIn and like you say, making these connections with actuaries, finance professionals, people all across the world. It's made so much easier by things like LinkedIn.
For
So
sure.
yeah, it's almost the fact that we are here, I suppose, illustrates
Exactly.
my point about the power that it
Yes.
has.
Yes, exactly. Well, looking forward to hearing your thoughts today. So, John, let's start with my first question, which is, why is the art of storytelling so important for actuaries?
Well, yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because I don't know about how the actuarial kind of training process happens in Australia and how different it might be from the UK and Ireland. But I suppose an awful lot of the early focus is on kind of those technical skills,
Right.
and we hone those. But I think something that comes into focus a bit later is that not everyone thinks like an actuary.
So true.
You know, it is really true, and
Yep.
it's a great thing because it's great what actuaries can bring to the world, but equally, if we were all the same, life would be
Mm,
very, very dull.
dull.
Um, so I think for me in a client facing role, which I've always been in, which is where
Mm,
I'm offering actuarial advice to, various stakeholders who aren't actuarial,
mm,
their world is bigger than what I'm doing for them. So
mm,
in
mm,
my current role, I'm advising pension scheme sponsors. So these are, companies of various shapes and sizes, you know, basically putting money into a pot to provide for their employees, mostly
mm,
kind of past employees.
mm,
But their concerns are much more wide ranging. If you're a finance director, pension is just one part of what you're thinking about. You're thinking of the overall financial health of the business. And
yep.
I suppose the way I think about it sometimes is that I swoop in to give very technical, specific advice about one specific thing,
Mm,
and then out I go, and they're on to the rest of their I suppose their engagements for the rest of the day.
mm,
So actually, if I'm able to be a storyteller, if I'm able to make that hour that I have FaceTime with these people engaging, well, I feel like that's a better way to do my job
mm,
because I think the other facet, and I don't know if you find this in your work as well, Julia, is that I think sometimes people hear the word actuary, actuarial, and I'll be honest, I think sometimes people hear the word pension
mm.
and they almost clam up. They're a little
Right.
bit intimidated by it.
Yep.
So I feel there's a great power in being able to be a storyteller and actually craft a narrative to what you're presenting to people
Mm.
because it just brings it all down to earth. It's more digestible, people are more comfortable with it, and I suppose it helps almost democratize what we do
Mm.
every day.
Mm. So, John, it sounds like when you're talking to your clients, and like you, I've been a consultant for practically my whole career as well. So often talking to non-actuaries. or other professionals. So it sounds like for you, though, being able to tell stories means that you're able to get your message across to people who aren't actuaries or don't have that actuarial technical training. You're able to communicate complicated concepts and have them be heard and understood.
Yes, yes, that is essentially it, and I think that's almost become a little bit of my calling card in a way
Mm,
that people. Now, I suppose I put pressure on myself by thinking people expect that from me now, but I think that's something people associate with me, that I'm able to take those complex
mm,
topics
mm,
and um for as a consultant, I think that if we can do that, that's job that's
mm,
job
mm.
done. And I think it can be difficult. And again, going back to your question about why is storytelling so important, is that, well, how much do our clients really need to know? They don't need to know, all the modeling that we have done in various bits of software in the background. They don't need to know the nitty-gritty, but
Mm.
they do, they appreciate having a knowledge of the concepts, those high level concepts that have gone in behind, that actually,
Yep,
if we can bring people on the journey with us
yep,
on that, it
yep.
makes it less intimidating. It means that they internally, our clients, can speak to their colleagues with some amount of conviction and knowledge, and saying, I have a grasp of what
Mm.
these people over in a room over there called actuaries have done for us,
Yep,
but I have a basic key grasp of that. And I think that
yep,
again, that's job done. Um
for
so
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a balance, isn't it? Because um sometimes it's tempting for us to share with our clients every single thing we've done. We got this data and then we built this great model and then we cleansed the data and we set some assumptions, and it was so exciting. And it is exciting for us as actuaries. And when we share those sorts of stories with other actuaries, we love it because we can relate to it because we've been there. But sometimes our clients, their eyes are glazing over when we start talking about data and models and coding, and because it's not their
Yeah.
world. So how has storytelling helped you in your conversations with clients? How do you kind of build that bridge between wanting to take them on the journey of everything you've done versus taking them on a journey that kind of helps them to understand the context and enough flavor of what you've done or what the work means to them? How do you do that?
Well, I think that question is the crux of it, really, and that's not a balance that we all get right all of the time
So
as
true.
actuaries,
Yeah.
because I think, and even as we were kind of getting all the tech ready here today, Julie, I know you
Yeah.
were saying, oh, we need to think about risk, and
Yeah. Yeah.
let's make sure we've covered all our bases, because actually I very much think of that we want our clients to be aware of, that, we get excited about our assumptions and our data cleansing and all of
Yeah.
those things. We need them to be aware that that's happened,
Yeah.
but it's telling them the bigger story. So sometimes
Yes.
I kind of I would own that, for want of a better word, and I would say to my client, look, there's bits and bobs that, and sometimes that's the phrase I
Yeah.
would use,
Okay.
is I would
Yep.
say there's bits and bobs that
Yeah.
has happened in the
Yeah.
background here
Yeah.
to tidy things up in order to make your data usable,
Yeah.
in order for you to be able to rely on this. But we
Yeah.
have had to make assumptions doing that, so
Yeah.
there might be some margin for error here.
Yeah.
So it's kind of owning that up front, but then saying, okay, but the general story is XYZ.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's
and
about
I
getting
think
the level of detail right. You're not telling them every single thing that you've done. You're telling them what's been done, but at a level that they need to know.
exactly. And you're telling them the why that you've done
Mm.
it, and the why you're telling them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think sometimes we can dive in and, like what you said, we built this beautiful model and we've done this and we've done that, and they don't know why. They're kind
No,
of like, why are
it's
you telling me
meaningless.
this, and why have you
Yeah.
done this? And it's yeah, it's like
Yeah.
they don't sit down and tell us the minutiae of their day.
Yes.
Um, but I think doing that and kind of being upfront and kind of not using those jargony bits instead, and me saying bits and bobs. That's probably that's probably the Irish in me. That's using that phrase.
Yeah.
But if you're using phrases like that get across the message, but in a real kind of friendly, warm, trustworthy way, it really helps build a relationship as well. So you're telling them a story and they're hearing a story from someone who's authentic and that they trust.
Yep.
I don't, that's more than most people get from a lot of their work relationships, I think. So if
So
we can
true.
differentiate ourselves in that way as actuaries, I think
Yeah.
it'd be
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like the art of storytelling is important for actuaries because it helps us to communicate with other professionals and to get our important information and explain complex concepts in ways that are suited to our audience. And often our audience is not
Yes.
a technical or not an actuarial audience. So
Hmm.
tell me, John, how else has storytelling helped you in your career?
I think in a word, it's helped massively. Um, so when I listen to these podcasts, I don't like people going on about themselves too much, but a little bit of backstory on
Yep.
me, is that I took some time out of the actuarial world quite early on in my career. And I took some time out of the actuarial world to study philosophy and theology and kind of think about pursuing that as a way forward. Um, and that time actually really helped me kind of develop my quote unquote craft of storytelling. So as
Okay.
part of that, I was, delivering little kind of reflection pieces to, my fellow students, to people in kind of faith groups in
Mm-hmm.
in Ireland in various parishes. Um, and equally, I had some incredible experiences working in Peru. I
Wow.
worked in a hospital in New York as part of a chaplaincy program there. All sorts of different things where you're honing your craft of kind of telling a story and getting a message across. So I think when I then returned to my actuarial career, being able to do that was a bit of an edge for me, I suppose, and something that I did. To borrow a phrase from Sheryl Sandberg, I leaned into that
Mm-hmm.
and kind of said, well, this is my thing. And partly because it comes naturally, I think,
Mm-hmm.
but partly because I had that time out. But coming from that kind of space where I had taken time out, being able to do this has helped kind of accelerate my career, I would say, without sounding too
Mm-hmm.
grandiose about it. That
Yep.
if I can build those relationships, have that confidence with my voice and how I articulate myself,
Mm-hmm.
that's a differentiator,
Yep.
and it's really helped me kind of get to where I want to be in my career that little bit quicker.
Mm.
Um, and I suppose bringing it back to our clients, because I bring everything back to my client, Julia. I'm I must be really annoying for my colleagues because every second question I'm like, well, what about the client?
Well, I'm sure your
And
clients are grateful for that, John.
well, yes, but I'd say I get annoying. I know I probably get annoying, but they say to me, they say, look, we just love how you kind of bring bring things back to basics,
Mm-hmm.
and we love how we feel that we know you and we can chat
Mm.
with you, and that you just make all of this pensions stuff just that little bit less scary.
Mm.
Not that I don't deliver bad news, because
Well,
unfortunately sometimes the financial markets aren't our friend in the
it's
pensions
true.
world, but it still just makes it all less scary and intimidating.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that is how it has helped me in my career, both kind of personally, but also kind of in the actual day-to-day work that I do.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds like it's not just about messaging, it's also about building relationships and building trust and being able to share information in a way that is digestible for people so that they can hear your
Yes.
message. Yeah, amazing. Okay, so let's bring it to life then. Can you share an example with us of where storytelling has helped you to achieve a certain outcome at work?
Yes, and I might cheat. I might give you a few,
Okay.
because there's kind of a few facets, and I suppose, um, going back to where we started, I suppose, with LinkedIn,
Mm.
that has led to me kind of developing and deepening relationships with people.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose that's both through kind of, those what they call the private messaging function, where you can kind
Yep.
of reach out one-on-one with people.
Yep.
But I think for me, posting regularly, posts
Mm-hmm.
about pensions, what I'm doing every day, how I'm helping my clients, that's really given me a voice and develop a little bit of a following. Sounds very grandiose and it's
Mm-hmm.
not, but there's people who would look at my content, and
Mm-hmm.
that piece of storytelling that I'm doing there in a very kind of text based,
Mm-hmm.
very kind of short form content has really helped me hone my skills even further and develop that voice, and particularly bridging that gap when I was doing more general storytelling to it
Mm-hmm.
becoming in a more kind of actuarial context.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think for me, and you mentioned that I've done some speaking as well, that, an example of where it's helped me achieve something is that I, instead of speaking about case studies, and we're all about case studies as actuaries because, examples are really helpful. I think sometimes they can be a little bit dry and a little bit clinical when they're case studies. So it kind of a simple little flip that I have done with those is that instead of calling it a case study and referring to it as a case study, I say, well, I'm going to tell you a story now.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you a story about how, a client of mine has dealt with this, or
Mm-hmm.
how a client could deal with this, or,
Mm-hmm.
just switching that language ever so slightly to warm it up a bit and
Mm-hmm.
to make it more relatable for people.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So
and then I think
do you think the word story is more kind of human and realistic than the word case study that's kind of clinical?
I think so. I think
Mm.
and case study I think can feel quite distant.
Mm.
There's
Mm.
something about a case study that makes it seem theoretical and
Yes.
seem not based in the real
It's
world.
synthetic.
And exactly. And
Mm.
sometimes our case studies, they are
They are.
hypothetical and they are synthetic
Mm.
because,
Mm.
it might be a new concept or something like
Mm.
that.
Mm.
But I think equally you can say, I'm going to tell you a story about how this might work,
Okay.
you know,
Yep.
and that it's again, it's bringing it back to what are we trying to achieve here? We're trying to achieve people getting it at the
Mm.
most basic core principle
Mm.
understanding level rather than all the nitty gritty.
Yep.
Um, so I think telling a story helps, and I think then in the day to day when I'm speaking to my clients, um, I'm a big fan of using an analogy.
Uh-huh.
Um, so again, to make this more tangible, I think it would be ironic if I didn't give you an analogy right now. Um, that when we're helping our clients with their pension schemes, and essentially you have, what is the value of the pension promises that you have made to your pension scheme members
Mm-hmm.
versus how much is, and again, not a technical term, how much is in the pot.
Yep.
And sometimes there's not enough money in the pot, and that has to be made good.
Mm.
And there's a mechanism that we have in the UK, and we have kind of recovery plans, which is where you basically go from a point where you don't have enough money in the plan to maybe in 2, 3, 4 years' time, there will be enough money in the pot.
Mm.
Um, and that involves contributions from the sponsoring employer.
Yep.
And it's a bit of a balancing act because it doesn't really help people to have too much money in the pot either.
Mm.
So what you need to do is have some sort of a contingent funding mechanism, which sounds very, very grandiose. But the way I think about it is when you're in a kind of a what I would call casual dining restaurant
Mm-hmm.
and you have to serve yourself the soda. or the soft drink or the fizzy drink or whatever
Uh-huh.
we call it. I'm aware of how international you are, Julia. So I'm using
Soft drink.
international terms.
Soft
You're
drink. Yeah, that's
internationally
right. Yep.
you're very famous all over the world. So I need to make this as broad as possible. But you've got your soft drink and your dispenser, and you probably put in a bit of ice.
Uh-huh.
And you don't normally just press the button once and turn it off, and you've got the perfect amount of soda
Never
in your
works like
cup.
that, right?
Never ever works. You
Mm.
go and you press it once,
Yep.
and then maybe you press it twice, and then you go. And apologies for those who are listening because I'm pointing here, but it's you're going goosh, 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 goosh at the end because you've got ice, you've got fizz, you've got all that stuff. There's all sorts of unknowns at the very end
Mm-hmm.
that you kind of have to make an assessment
Mm.
with every little push of the button.
Mm-hmm.
And equally, in the UK funding, what we do is we might have a couple of years of, you're definitely going to make these certain amounts of contributions because we know that the hole is kind of so big in the funding, unfortunately, that
Yep.
those payments definitely will need to be made. But
Yep.
then as you get to the end, as you're getting close to, having enough money in the pot, we need to stop and assess.
Mm.
And if there's still not enough money in the pot, we put in a little bit more.
It's a gush.
And then we
Gush.
assess again, maybe, yeah.
Yep.
And that's essentially what the company is doing at the very end,
Right.
that they're working with the scheme managers to say, do we need another or not? And I know that might sound like a very silly example, but that's
Mm.
how it works. And actually,
Great analogy.
if I had just talked to you about contingent funding mechanisms for 5 minutes there, Julia, I'm sure your listenership would have declined very quickly.
Yeah. Well,
So
and I mean, for those of us that don't work in pensions, it's maybe harder to understand some of that specific terminology and some of the nuances and practical applications and generally accepted
yeah,
practice kind of thing. But we all understand what it's like to fill up a drink. So you're giving us an example that we can all relate to, whether or not
yeah,
we have a technical background, whether we're an actuary, whether we're Australian or from the UK or we're American, might just call the
yeah,
drink something different. But we can
yeah.
understand that concept. So that analogy is so powerful.
Yes, yes, and that's what I try and do when I'm
Mm.
speaking with my clients, when I'm posting on LinkedIn,
Mm.
all of that stuff. So it's that for me is a really kind of key example of how I've helped my clients just understand something that might have been
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
intimidating and
Yeah.
technical for them.
Fantastic. So we've talked about why storytelling is important. We've talked about how it's helped you in your career. You've given us an example about how you do that with analogies or with stories rather than kind of that clinical case study. What are some practical kind of how-to tips and tactics that actuaries could try if they're wanting to improve their storytelling skills?
Well, I think where I would start is just say to people to kind of go easy on themselves. I
Mm.
think it can sound scary
Mm.
to kind of think, oh, I'm going to become this storyteller now. I'm going to become
Yeah.
this expert storyteller and wait till you see my, debut novel. It kind of has these connotations.
True.
Whereas actually, you can start in a really controlled environment. You can start internally at your firm at a team meeting
Mm-hmm.
or something like that and just kind of practice putting in to place some of those things that I've spoken about in terms of maybe using an analogy,
Mm-hmm.
telling a story, maybe doing that bit of editing on yourself in terms of the technical detail, just kind of asking yourself those
Mm-hmm.
hard questions of do I need to mention this?
Mm.
But I think something else I would say is that we all love a good PowerPoint presentation. It's a stalwart of modern corporate life.
For better or worse,
But
that's true.
yeah, yeah, well, and that's exactly it, Julia, for better or for worse. And I
Mm.
think I think sometimes when it's on the worst end of the spectrum, it's to do with people kind of slavishly following a PowerPoint. And
Yes.
we all know those presentations sometimes where it's kind of line by line.
Mm.
And, you could have just read the PowerPoint instead of being,
Yes,
live in a meeting.
exactly.
Um, so I think it's seeing PowerPoint for what it is that it's a tool
Mm-hmm.
for you to tell a story rather
Yep.
than something to be slavishly, followed.
Following. Mm.
So at Amazon, we've all heard of Amazon, I think it's years, it's nearly 20 years, I think, that the CEO has said, no, we're
No
we're we're
PowerPoint.
just gonna we're just gonna get rid of PowerPoint because actually
Mm.
you can more succinctly kind of tell your story through some bullet points and
Mm.
that's it.
Mm.
So the reason I say all of that is that maybe think about before looking at your PowerPoint, sit down with a good old-fashioned piece of paper and say, well, what are the three main things I'm going to try say here?
Mm. Mm. What are your key
And
points?
then just, yeah,
Yeah.
and just say them. And then if you need a chart or if you need a few words on a bullet point or you need some kind of action points,
Mm.
pop them on a PowerPoint slide. And it's always very handy. And again, if we're on webinars and stuff, it's a really great tool to
Mm.
engage people, but
Mm.
only when it's the supporting act
Yes.
to you.
Yes.
Um,
You don't want to be the supporting act to your slides. You want to be the main event.
exactly. Exactly, because
Yeah.
you don't want people to be kind of trying to read, kind of squinting to
Mm.
read
Mm.
behind you,
Mm.
you know, or, that's in a live situation. But if you're in a webinar, you don't want people not actually looking at the little box that has you in it
Exactly.
and they're looking at the slides.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so so that would be kind of a little tactic I would advise is just kind
Okay.
of step
Step
away from the PowerPoint.
step away from the PowerPoint. That's a great one. And so step away from the PowerPoint and really just focus on what the messages are that you're wanting to convey. Yeah, and that can
Yeah.
be a handy point too, just in terms of calming your nerves around presenting, I find. If I know what my key messages are, I'm less worried about remembering the script or, following the whatever's going on the PowerPoint. So it can help nerves as well. So which also helps your delivery, right?
Exactly. And I think you hit on something really important there, which is kind of trusting yourself, is that
Mm,
your key message. You've done
mm,
the hard work in the background.
mm,
You're not presenting to either, your colleagues or your client or whatever.
mm.
Y- you're not presenting to them because you know nothing. You're presenting to them because you know what you're doing. And
Yep.
even if you're stretching yourself ever so slightly to do it, you still know more than most people in the room about whatever you're
Mm,
presenting on.
mm.
So it's trusting yourself with that and saying, okay, well, I deserve to be here. Like you say, Julia, I know the message.
Yep.
So, you know, if PowerPoint crashes,
Which it sometimes
I'm
does.
still good. Yes, yes.
So, okay, so bringing it back to storytelling then, John. So, once you've stepped away from the PowerPoint and you've got your key messages, how do you turn that into a story?
My kind of key way of doing that is to take it from that kind of abstract to make it a more personal story.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of bring it into a hypothetical. So instead of saying, the graph here shows that this went
Mm-hmm.
up and this went down.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of say, oh, if you were a pension scheme
Mm.
that was invested in, you know, equities over this time horizon, you would have seen, and,
Yep.
and just telling the story like that,
Yep.
that actually it's a small tweak, but you've moved from telling people to look at a graph and a line to actually making it real and making it tangible. And
Mm.
obviously, I'm using a pension example, but if you were in practicing in life or, any other sort of an area, just
Mm.
just bring it back to something that your audience will understand.
Mm.
Um, and even for me, actually, sometimes I'm advising the sponsors of a pension scheme, and sometimes I'm advising the pension scheme
Mm.
themselves. So I would tweak how I would present things
Yep.
based on their interests because they're going to root for people like them and they're going to
Yeah.
more easily see things from the perspective of people like them.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so it's just kind of flipping that kind of style and that I suppose the language that you're using to just be personal rather than abstract.
Yep.
Um, and one thing I would say is that watching TED Talks and stuff can be really helpful for this, because so many TED Talks, and I read something up on this recently, that I think in TED Talks, I think something like 65-70% of the content is that emotive storytelling content.
Mm,
And then the rest is kind of facts and figures and stuff to back that up.
mm, mm.
And when we think of TED Talks, we think of experts in their field.
Yeah.
So it's kind of counterintuitive to think that only about 30% might be facts and figures and kind of experty things.
Mm,
But that's the reality. So
mm,
watching how people are doing that in that really, you know, creme de la creme sort of group of people,
mm.
I think can be really helpful. Don't be discouraged by it, because I suppose it's intimidating. Don't start comparing yourself to TED Talk speakers, but
Yeah.
just observe
Noticing
and see
how
how
they
it's
use
done.
storytelling as well, even to communicate complicated concepts to a very diverse audience too. I mean, a TED Talk
Exactly.
has got a global stage, so yeah. Okay. So step back from the PowerPoint, understand your key messages, and then know your
Mhm.
audience so that you can
Yeah,
work out how to kind of anchor your points in something that is meaningful for them. That sounds like a very practical formula for actuaries who are wanting to improve their storytelling skills. And
yeah,
John, you told us that you learnt these skills because you took a bit of a detour outside the actuarial
yeah.
profession and doing some other things where you learnt how to do this. But what's one tip that you would have for actuaries who are wanting to become better storytellers? Do they need to go and take a detour like you did, or is there something else they can do?
Yeah. No. So to answer that second part of the question first, you don't need to go as extreme as me and hand in the resignation letter and go on a fact-finding mission.
Yep.
No. Um, I think, I will use an old adage from my mother actually, which
Mhm.
is, you have two ears and one mouth for a reason, which she may have said to me for other more disciplinary reasons back in the day. But the point there is to just start by listening,
Mm,
and listen out for stories all around you, and listen out for how people are telling those stories around you. Just soak that up. Um, because I think what you will find, it's like anything. If you've got some sort of an awareness, you'll see it everywhere,
yep.
and it's just picking that up, and almost by osmosis,
Mm,
you can hone those skills a little bit.
yep.
Um, some of the best communicators in the world, you know, didn't start out that way, and they've actually had to hone that craft and listen out. Um, so that would be my one tip for the start of the journey, to just listen to those great stories all
Just
around
listen.
you.
Just listen.
Yeah.
Some great advice there from you today, John. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really interesting to hear how storytelling has been such a powerful tool in your toolkit, and how other actuaries can harness the power of storytelling to help accelerate their careers as well. Thanks so much for joining us, John.
Well, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure.